So, as many of you already know, on September 10th, 2025, which was yesterday for me as of filming this, conservative activist Charlie Kirk was shot and killed at a Turning Point USA event at Utah Valley University. And as of my filming this, the shooter is currently still at large, and all we really know about this person is some images that have been released of him online. Now, so much has already been said, and will likely continue to be said about the shooting over the coming days. But I just wanted to take a moment to make this video because I want to express my growing feelings of dread, concern, and anger around this moment as a trans person. To be clear, I cannot and do not speak for all trans people by any means, but I think that by expressing my own personal worries, fears, and angers, and frustrations, I hope I can elucidate for others why many trans people have been really terrified right now, especially around what's been happening with this shooting, but just as a climax of a lot of things that have been going on. Because I think some of the things are quite obvious to people, and others are actually not so obvious. I want to start first, though, by saying as clearly and unequivocally as I can, I do not endorse vigilante violence or extrajudicial murder like what happened to Charlie Kirk. Let me say that again. I do not endorse it. I will say it a third time, so there's no mistaking me. I do not endorse, encourage, or approve of vigilante violence or extrajudicial murder like what happened to Charlie Kirk. No one deserves to die that way. We're going to talk a little bit more about the idea of political violence in just a little bit, so hold on to that. But I am just specifically talking about this kind of action. It is horrifying and shameful that we live in a country where this happens nearly every single goddamn week, if not every day. In fact, less than an hour after Kirk was shot, another gunman opened fire at Evergreen High School in Colorado, wounding 2 students. This is the reality of America, a country where violence like this isn't just allowed, it's actively enabled. And on top of that, I would be lying if I said that I didn't feel empathy and fear and sadness as I watched a video yesterday of this man bleeding out from the neck. Even a day later, my mind keeps circling back to what it must feel like. To wake up thinking you've got your whole life ahead of you, only to collapse in front of a crowd of people feeling your life drain out of you. To know that this was your last day because someone else decided it would be. I can't help but feel that not only on a basic human level, but because it's a feeling that I can really relate to as a trans person, worrying about that same exact thing happening to me every single day in this country. Someone with a gun could just take my life right fucking now, and I could do nothing about it, and have been having that feeling linger in my mind every single day, and having people around me just not want to talk about it whenever I want to bring it up, and me not knowing how to handle that. I get it. I feel it. And I felt it looking at that video. It terrifies me. So I have some level of empathy for this. But I also want to make clear that I do not feel any amount of sadness over his death. First and foremost, Charlie Kirk was a fascist. And before anyone in the comments tries to dismiss this, I don't use that word flippantly. He openly advocated fascist and authoritarian policies. The violence that ended his life is the same violence he spent his career fueling. He also pushed racist policies. He spat misogyny, fighting to strip women of bodily autonomy both politically and personally. He also supported the continual ongoing attack on immigrants that we are seeing in this country with the ICE raids and numerous other rhetoric against immigrants. He raged against Islam, calling people like Zohran Mamdani parasites and branding an entire religion as violent. He was anti-Semitic. He cheered on Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. He dreamed of a Christo-fascist state and wrapped it in an American flag. And for me, most pertinently, he was proudly homophobic and transphobic. He called trans healthcare butchery. He vilified trans people as predators. He pushed for policies that criminalize our existence, and he incited both institutional and personal violence against queer people every single day. He even argued that some gun deaths were a necessary price to protect the Second Amendment, while working tirelessly to make sure trans people were blamed, feared, and scapegoated for mass shooting violence.
I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal.
He literally spent what turned out to be his final moments vilifying trans people, parroting the lie that we're disproportionately behind mass shootings while preparing to defend the same gun culture that left him bleeding out with a bullet in his neck a few moments later. That man who died on the ground, the one that I do feel a flicker of empathy for, was also someone who would have gleefully cheered and propagandized the same thing happening to me as a victory. He would have dehumanized my death as justice, a punchline, and proof of his ideology. In fact, he actively campaigned for it, for all trans people. I will not mince words, the world is better without him, even if I wouldn't have chosen the way he went. I won't shed a tear for a man who dedicated his life to make mine shorter and less happier. He was a Nazi in a nice suit, and the only thing respectable about him is the silence that he finally left behind. I did not wish him dead in this way, but I am certainly not upset that he is gone. This was the man that Charlie Kirk was, and it's why it's enraging to watch the political establishment scramble to lionize him. Of course, obviously, Trump and the Republicans are rushing to turn him into a martyr, folding his death into every one of their ongoing narratives, that we need more militarized crackdowns, that gender ideology is fueling an epidemic of violence, that liberals, Democrats, and leftists, who are all lumped together as the same exact thing, are waging war on conservatives. They're already escalating the rhetoric, using this as a way to lay the groundwork to justify even more violence against numerous people that they've been targeting for months now, if not years.
Charlie spoke the truth. He said what he felt, and they killed him for it. The message is shut your mouth. If you can be murdered for speaking your mind in America, then America's done. We might as well live in the dark ages. And this isn't the first time this has happened. This is just the worst time. They shot Trump. They went to Kavanaugh's house with a rifle. They're firebombing Elon's cars, rioting in LA. Trans shooters are killing our kids. It's officially over now. After today, we're not taking it anymore. They're telling us we're at war. This is a war we didn't ask for, and this is a war they can't win.
But what's even more concerning to me is the equivocation from so-called centrist and left-leaning figures. As I write this, Bernie Sanders put out a statement calling Kirk
someone who I strongly disagreed with on almost every issue, but who was clearly a very smart and effective communicator and organizer, and someone unafraid to get out into the world and engage the public.
Ezra Klein, who's been spending the last few months boosting the tech oligarch-funded Abundance campaign, which is designed to strangle economic populism and keep neoliberal elites in charge, also praised Kirk for doing politics the right way. And Gavin Newsom went so far as to say that we should honor Charlie's memory by continuing his spirit of good faith debate. The only reason people like Sanders, Klein, or Newsom can say these things about Kirk is because he wrapped his fascism in a suit and packaged cruelty as respectable. Respectability only ever protects the status quo. It demands people like me mourn the death of the man who wanted us gone instead of grieving those harmed daily by the system that he helped enable. Trans people are beaten, legislated against, murdered in silence pretty much daily, and not a single earnest tear is shed for us by those in power. There is no place for political violence in this country is something that we repeatedly hear after events like this.
Political violence, in fact, is political cowardice. It means that you cannot convince people of the correctness of your ideas, and you have to impose them through force. Every American, no matter what one's political point of view may be, must condemn all forms of political violence and all forms of intimidation.
All the while, this country uses laws and rhetoric every day to attack marginalized people, disabled people, trans people, immigrants, women, BIPOC. Just because it's done with a pen and not a gun doesn't mean it's not political violence. It's just wrapped up in civility. It is why I do not condemn political violence in totality. We can get into my specific views on that. I think there's a lot of nuance to talk about how you resist political structures and things like that. But it is also important to recognize that political violence is not just done by people who pick up a gun. It's done by people who write legislation against marginalized people. That is still political violence. Centrism pretends to balance left and right, but in practice it primes people towards conservatism and ultimately towards fascism. It's the reassurance that the system works, that progress is inevitable, that utopia is just around the corner if we restore the status quo. And because it insists on balance, it equates marginalized people who demand change with the fascists who target us. That false equivalence props up the status quo and blames victims for our own suffering and turns centrists into enablers of the very violence they claim to oppose. Which is why someone like Charlie Kirk can be treated as respectable, why BIPOC, trans, queer, disabled, and other marginalized people are cast as destabilizing threats simply for demanding a world that harms us less. Take Gavin Newsom, who has continually worked to block and bury trans protections in California as he's tried to push himself as the next presumptive nominee for president on the Democrat side. He's vetoed custody protections for affirming parents, discouraged LGBTQ bills, and parroted right-wing talking points on pronouns, incarcerating trans people, and gender-affirming care. Not to mention his policies on homelessness and other folks. He's even platformed Steve Bannon and the now-dead Charlie Kirk on his podcast, giving them space to spew bile to his audience that styles itself as progressive. Kirk was allowed to speculate on banning transition until 25, cite the debunked Cass review, and call trans healthcare butchery on his podcast. Newsom even nodded along, agreeing with things like discriminatory practices against trans people in sports.
So like you right now should come out and be like, you know what? The young man who's about to win the state championship in the long jump in female sports,
right.
that shouldn't happen. You as the governor should step out and say no.
No, and I appreciate.
But like, would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that.
I can see you wrestling with it.
No, I'm not wrestling. I'm not wrestling with the fairness issue. I totally agree with you. By the way, as someone with 4 kids, I think
and
got
2 daughters, right?
2 daughters.
And I have a daughter too.
And a wife that went, God forbid, to Stanford and played on the junior national soccer team, and a guy who got into college only because I was left-handed and could throw a baseball a little bit or hit the ball for a little bit. So I revere sports, and so the issue of fairness is completely legit.
Meanwhile, he's never once given that same platform to a trans person to speak on our own lives. And when we call this out, suddenly we're the problem. Because he's busy trolling Trump with memes, going viral, posturing as the Democrat who owns the right. He's the strong man that we need to take down the strong man of Trump. The spectacle is the point. People would rather watch the meme war, Newsom sparring with Republicans, redrawing districts, clearing homeless encampments in the name of order, than face how those moves crush the most vulnerable. It's comfort politics. Better to cheer on a strongman who looks tough against fascism than doing the terrifying, necessary work of trying to dream up and build something better. So, saving democracy becomes a slogan for watching it erode. Meanwhile, trans people, unhoused people, anyone already on the margins are treated as acceptable collateral in this fight. Nostalgia for the comfort of what we know, Trump's lives being erased. Which brings me back to Kirk. The desperate need to frame him as respectable within the status quo means anyone who acknowledges his act of fascist harm is punished. MSNBC's Matthew Dowd was fired yesterday for simply describing accurately Kirk's controversial views. Trans writer Gretchen Felker-Martin had her Red Hood run at DC Comics canceled for making the exact kind of biting joke that is her entire career around Kirk. She's literally the woman who wrote Manhunt, a novel where TERFs like J.K. Rowling get murdered in a testosterone-fueled apocalypse. The kind of jokes that she was making is literally her brand. It doesn't have to be for you. They're not entirely for me, to be entirely frank. But it's also clear that this isn't about that. It's about vilifying anyone who speaks up against Kirk and frames him as the man that he was, a fascist. Were they off-color jokes? Sure, they may not be your thing. She certainly wasn't advocating for violence against Kirk, though. Even I, last night, posted on Blue Sky that I choose to dishonor Charlie Kirk's memory by living my life joyously, and that got flagged and censored by Blue Sky. None of that was advocating violence. Hell, I wasn't even describing Charlie Kirk's views. I was just saying I choose to dishonor his memory by living my life longer than he did. Hell, I'm even worried that this video might get me punished by YouTube, despite the fact that I've repeatedly and overtly said numerous times in this video that I do not approve of what happened to Charlie Kirk, nor the type of violence that happened to him. But this framing around trans people has continued to get more and more consistent. Personally, I was suspended on Blue Sky a few weeks ago, a supposedly better platform than Elon Musk's Nazi-infested X, for saying, quote, "I wish ill on J.K. Rowling." It's a vague statement that does not express intent for violence to be used against J.K. Rowling, or even violence to happen to J.K. Rowling, who is a billionaire who actively funds harassment campaigns, lobbies against trans rights in the UK, and spreads the rhetoric fueling our oppression globally. Anti-trans bile, like hers, is allowed to flow unchallenged on every platform because it's treated as normal and civil. Meanwhile, trans people like me constantly have our words censored. Context and power dynamics are actively ignored. A trans person venting anger at Rowling, a person who has no structural power like she does, is not the same as Rowling doing the same towards us. If Rowling said the same thing about me, it would unleash real harassment and violence. But that difference never matters when the goal is disciplining trans people for speaking up about the way we are harmed and if we express anger at the people who do it to us. The media, meanwhile, of course, can't wait to weaponize Kirk's death against us. Less than an hour after the shooting, Fox News had a pundit on to speculate that it could have been a trans person, priming their audience built up on years of propaganda.
I don't think it was a coincidence that the shot rang out when you get a question about transgender mass shootings. That maybe, hopefully I'm wrong. I'll probably get criticized for jumping to conclusions, but I'm just telling you, in the 30 minutes or so, I thought, wow, I don't think that's a coincidence, but we'll see.
The Wall Street Journal even floated today an unconfirmed story that the bullet was engraved with trans and anti-fascist slogans, preparing the ground to blame us collectively for Charlie Kirk's shooting. That kind of reporting is irresponsible at best. Like, how much do you think can fit on a goddamn bullet? But this isn't just random scapegoating, it's laying the narrative groundwork to escalate attacks on trans rights and safety. Our healthcare is already under assault. There's a bill going through the government right now that would seek to defund any trans-related healthcare. But now our right to self-defense is openly being targeted, with conservatives calling for trans people to lose the right to own guns. And look, I'm not someone who's ever been big on gun ownership. I do not own a gun, nor do I ever really intend to, though I might be considering it. But we also need to look at things like the Mulford Act in 1967, which was about stopping the Black Panthers from legally carrying firearms to monitor police brutality in their own communities. California state moved fast to strip them of that right because an armed black population threatened white supremacy's grip on law and order. And this is the same playbook Nazis used in the 1930s. Jewish communities were systemically disarmed under the guise of gun control, leaving them vulnerable to escalating violence and eventually genocide. The message was clear then, and it's clear now. Marginalized people, like trans people, are always the first stripped of their right to defend themselves. And this is not an idle concern. About a month before Charlie Kirk's death, Donald Trump signed an executive order encouraging the mass commitment of unhoused people labeled mentally ill into psychiatric institutions, facilities in the United States that are often underfunded and overcrowded, that often operate more like prisons than care centers. On top of that, marginalized people, trans, queer, disabled, BIPOC, are already disproportionately likely to face homelessness and mental illness. Combine that with the current push to brand all trans people as mentally ill, and the intent is obvious. The language of mental illness is being weaponized as a pretext for surveillance, incarceration, and erasure of anyone deemed unproductive. This is the same logic the Nazis used in the 1930s and 40s to justify the incarceration and extermination of disabled, queer, and trans people, even those viewed as racially pure, because they were already treated as broken stock. As fascist rhetoric surges and politicians advance policies built on that very logic, it's a roadmap to erasure. I have seen this personally firsthand. I have said over and over and over again, and will say it over and over again here too, that what happened to Kirk is wrong, and I do not approve of it. But the second I make any post that doesn't explicitly restate that disclaimer, it has gotten ripped out of context and spread on X, YouTube, Reddit, Blue Sky, to paint me as if I was gleefully cheering on his death. This has been done over and over and over again to numerous trans people and marginalized people. People are so desperate to vilify trans women and trans people more broadly as inherently violent. Even some other LGBTQ folks are getting in on the game, trying to be one of the good ones, hoping respectability will save them. It won't. This is why I'm both terrified and angry as a trans person. We're watching a centrist culture on the one hand encourage passivity in the face of rising fascism on the other hand, one that treats us as either perpetual victims, already lost causes not worth saving, or as villains to be scapegoated whenever it's convenient. Our only place in the public imagination is the target of right-wing violence, and I refuse to accept that role. I am here, alive, furious, and unafraid to name the systems that would rather erase me than change. That's the truth that they don't want you to hear, because once you face it, you can't go back to the comfort of pretending centrism will save you.